You're watching Narrify.
I never imagined my life could be unmade in the span of a single drunken night and the calculated cruelty of a woman who had been watching me for years. If you had asked me, the man who loved quietly and lived a steady life, whether a stranger could dismantle my home, my reputation, and the memory of everything I once believed, I would have sworn it impossible. But I was wrong. Everything I was and everything I thought I had, my marriage to Maya, our plans for children, the quiet dignity of ordinary days, was pulled out from under me by a pair of identical faces, one of them smiling at me in the early morning with a grin I would come to know as malice. Maya and I had been married for 5 years. We lived in a modest house on the edge of Sacramento. 2 bedrooms, a small yard with a lemon tree that did well in our patch of sun, shelves of books, mugs stained with coffee rings. Maya was a quiet gravity I had built my life around. Calm, steady, small. Jokes, the kind of person who made a house feel like a safe place. She worked in healthcare, administration, and had a way of moving through the day that made everything softer. She didn't talk much about her family. When I asked, she'd say simply, "There's no easy story there," and change the subject with a laugh that made me think, okay, I'll respect the boundary. Maybe that was my first mistake. Not asking more, not prying. Maybe I should have pressed until I found the seams. But we had a life together and I trusted it. Work had been brutal that month. Late nights, an unexpected round of layoffs, the constant nerve of trying to keep a team afloat while doing too much with too little. My friends insisted I come out, insisted on one night where I would stop being sensible and be somebody else for a few hours. I agreed because I needed to breathe. The bar was noisy. I remember lights blurred into streaks and the rush of cold air as I stumbled outside. I remember laughter and a hand on my shoulder. I remember the feeling of being buoyed by a stranger's insistence to keep drinking because we were friends now and the world could wait. The details after that are fogged in alcohol and shame, but the one image that comes back clearly is a face. Maya's face, or so I thought in the fog. A face leaning close, lips near my ear, the scent of perfume that was faintly floral and familiar. I woke up in a cheap motel room with a headache that felt like a fist. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me, and the sunlight was a thin band of brightness. For a panic moment I thought it was Maya beside me. Then the face turned and my gut dropped. It was not Maya. It was someone with the same features, the same dark hair, the same eyes, but not the softness I knew. This woman's smile had a sharpened edge. She watched me with a look that was almost triumphant. "You look better sober," she said, as if she expected a compliment. Her voice was Maya's voice with an accent of something else. Playful, practiced. She called me by a nickname only Maya had ever used. The stomach dropped further. "Who are you?" I asked, when my throat would finally form words. Her expression shifted. "Maya told me about you," she said. "She told me everything. I thought." She shrugged, a small movement that mattered. She said, casually, "You were perfect." And the meaning of that word in her mouth is the thing I still wake up to replay. I discovered later, too late, that her name was Lena. Lena Harrow. A name that is light and pretty until you attach it to intention. Lena was Maya's twin sister, a person my wife had never told me about. Maya had been estranged from that family, she had once said. Family rifts happen. People have reasons. I believed her. I trusted the life we'd made together. It would have been a strange thing, if not for the fact that Lena knew details about us no one else could have known. The motel room was not a misread. It was a performance. Lena had been watching, learning, and then she had picked a night when I was drunk enough to be pliable. When I came home, when I staggered into our kitchen with coffee on my breath, trying to wrinkle my face into an explanation, Maya was on the couch, tears on her cheeks, a phone clutched in her hand. The world narrowed down to that single image. Maya, small and broken and somehow furious. The phone showed photographs. There were images of me with Lena. Smiles in dim light, hands too close, a picture taken from above, generous with intimacy. The camera had captured what I couldn't properly remember. My first instinct was to explain, to say I thought it was Maya, that I had been lying on a cheap motel bed and the world had folded itself wrong. I told her that. I tried to show her the fog in my head, to make her believe. But the photos and that single caption in a message thread said something else. I had slept with Maya's sister. The phrasing was flat and precise and meant to hurt. Maya's face crumpled in a way I have only seen once since, like paper burned and left smoking. She left that night, not in a dramatic whirlwind, not with a shout or a tell-all collapse. She packed a bag, took our dog, and stepped out the door as if she had rehearsed the movement 1,000 times. Her words were clipped. I can't do this, she said. Her eyes found me once, clear and unblinking, and she drove away. The whole thing felt implacable, like watching a finality you had not paid for. I spent the next days trying to contact her, calling, leaving voicemails, begging for a conversation. I sent photos of my blank phone screen from the motel, asked her to look at my call log to verify the night. She stopped answering. Her silence was a wall that I couldn't climb. Then the messages arrived, messages from friends, from acquaintances, from colleagues, asking if it were true. Phones that had once greeted me warmly turned cold. Gossip moved faster than I could shout the truth. The story was simple and sensational. The husband slept with the twin, the wife walked out, and the husband was unfaithful. Context did not matter. Drunken mistakes were not allowed to be messy. They had to become moral currency. I tried to tell the truth. I thought she was Maya. People hesitated, then distanced. How could you mistake someone for your wife? A friend asked with clinical incredulity. You were drunk, someone else said. The more I explained, the more it sounded like an excuse. The narrative was already written, and Lena, with the coolness of an actress, had ensured everyone saw the moments she wanted them to see. 2 weeks later, Lena came to my door. She stood in the hallway like she was in a theater, perfectly composed, one hand resting on the knob as a casual claim on my life. I could see her clearly then. The same face as my wife, and yet the eyes full of a hunger I'd mistaken before for ardor. She stepped inside like someone entering a place she had always owned. You should have watched yourself, she said softly. Her voice never rose. It didn't have to. She sat on our couch as if it belonged to her and watched me fumble, watched me explain and fail. I loved her first, she said, a detail out of nowhere, like a confession that split me open. I always loved her. I loved you too. Her words made no sense apart from the logic she had constructed. If she loved Maya, and also loved me, then destroying their life was a method of revenge, a way to claim something through another person's ruin. Her plan was not simple passion. It was a slow tactical war. I couldn't prove at first that she had engineered things. It was never about a single act. Lena had set traps and left breadcrumbs in the right places. She had forged photographs that made one image more damning than 100 explanations. She had used our similarities. A glance, a twin gesture, a smile in the dark. She knew how the brain fills in blanks, how memory can be beguiled. She had spent months watching us, learning, waiting, and then one drunken night became the fulcrum of her long game. From that point, the house felt like a stage set for a play I didn't understand. Everyone in our circle had a part to play. Friends, neighbors, family, and Lena knew how to make sure they saw only what she wanted them to see. She worked with a precise cruelty. She texted my coworkers, feigning compassion, dropping hints that I was unstable and erratic at work. She called my mother and left a tremulous message about being hurt and frightened. She positioned herself as the wounded woman whose sister had betrayed her and struck me as the man who had shattered her life. Her timing and restraint were part of her craft. She never yelled, never screamed, always maintained the soft tone of someone bewildered and injured. My professional life buckled beneath the weight of whispers. A project I'd led for months went sideways, not because of my work but because Lena planted suggestions and rumors that made people doubt the team's stability. Comments were taken as proof of breakdown. Emails that were once innocuous became proof of instability when framed by the narrative she circulated. HR called me in twice. My boss's eyes were politely suspect. There were conversations about stress leave. I began to feel like a man who had been reconstituted by rumor. The workroom, which had once been a place of focused purpose and bright screens, became a place where I kept my shoulders high and my explanations flat. People didn't want to work with a man who might implode. She moved with a surgeon's precision, and the damage was cumulative. I tried legal channels, but the law is slow and the truth requires proof. Physical proof or testimony that does not pivot on the word of the woman who had crafted the story. Get a lawyer, people said. Show them the motel evidence. Show them the messages. But Lena was ahead. She had created a narrative so consistent that any attempt to unravel it made me look frantic and unstable. When I provided screenshots, friends and acquaintances with half-formed doubts said, "He's trying to cover his tracks," as if the person who handed them evidence should be suspected first. Lena would weep in a small circle of support in public. She would sit quietly in coffee shops and let people confide in her. She was a spider weaving a net, and every time I fought the web, I only got tangled further. Maya called me once, a month after she left. I remember the sound of her voice like a hollow instrument. She said she needed distance, that she had to protect herself. Her words made sense on the surface, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Emptiness, as though something in her had been taken. We spoke about the night once. I begged her to remember how we had laughed before, how she used to fall asleep with her head on my chest, how nothing before it had felt like this. Her voice was small and final. "I can't undo what I saw," she said. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it was Lena. But what she showed me was you. I can't go back to pretending I didn't see it." Those words formed a sentence I'd never be able to erase. What she showed me was you. It was a legal and moral crystallization of the idea that perception is often more decisive than truth. Things darkened in ways I had never imagined. I woke up in the middle of the night with sweat on my back, fearing a siren outside, expecting a breathless pounding on the door. The mail that once brought utility bills and magazines now carried letters that hinted at complications. "We have concerns that have been raised," one HR message read, and my world tiled again. I began to distrust my own memory, trying to figure out which parts of the night were mine and which parts were constructed. Lena had a way of being in the right place at the right time. She would appear at a community event with wet eyes and a stoic face, letting her sisters and friends surround her with sympathy. She would call a neighbor with small concerns about my behavior and suggest calm. People instinctively sided with someone who presented as vulnerable and composed. Financial things began to be affected too. A bill was missed because I had been dealing with investigations and calls. Lena, with a practiced attention to detail, seized on each lapse like a trump card. She would call creditors in gentle outrage and hint that the stress of domestic problems was affecting my ability to manage accounts. The result was a spiral. The more stressed I became, the more mistakes I made. The more mistakes I made, the more credible Lena's narrative seemed. She was a mathematician of misery, one small cluster of incidents multiplied by rumor and the law of social contagion to become a catastrophe. I tried to lay a trap of my own. I attempted to get Lena on record contradicting herself. I tried to get witnesses to assert misrepresentations that she had made. But the more I chased her, the more she seemed to retreat like fog while her allies gathered. She had this way of speaking publicly that made you think she is only telling her truth, and who can prosecute the truth of someone's feelings? Lena used language as a weapon, portraying hurt feelings and emotional alarm as facts. She made people assume a domestic pattern I had not recognized at all. Friends who once defended me when I was late to dinners now tilted their heads, fingering the rim of their glass sympathetically and saying, "We just don't know what's happening." They did not want to choose a side in what had turned into a moral puzzle. People prefer the side that offers clean certainty, especially when that side is comforting and articulate. A man I knew from college, someone I had trusted for years, called me out of the blue and apologized before he even spoke. "I heard things," he said, his voice torn. He asked if I was okay. I realized empathy had limits when scandal had teeth. The calculus of human trust is small and quick. It takes so little to topple reputation when the right narrative is laid down and when no one has the energy to fight for nuance. At the same time, Lena made herself irreplaceable in broader social circles. She went to community fundraisers, volunteered in ways that made a show of vulnerability, and became a figure of sympathy. She volunteered to sit on panels about domestic safety and abuse, subtly repositioning herself as an advocate. In the slow theater of public life, she cast herself as someone who had been wronged and had risen. People thanked her for her courage. The irony made my teeth ache because she had used those platforms to validate the very story that destroyed me. One night, a letter came from a lawyer, my lawyer, saying she was pursuing a restraining order. My heart collapsed. It was a bludgeon that made no legal sense on paper, but in practice was devastating. The very system that promises will deliver justice often tends to the appearance of safety first. A restraining order does not require guilt in the criminal sense. It requires the presentation of fear and reasonable concern. Lena presented the narrative convincingly. Her lawyers wrote letters that read like tender devotion, describing the emotional harm she had endured. When I tried to contest it, the hearings were maddeningly procedural and public humiliation is a different kind of cruelty. A man in the local courthouse looked at me with pity, lowering his voice with hesitation when he passed. The humiliation accumulates. Even if the order is temporary and civil, the damage to a person's name is real and persistent. Maya's silence became the ricochet that broke me the most. If Lena had been the instrument, Maya was the victim and I was the reason. But Maya's decision to not come back, whether she had been convinced or simply too exhausted to fight the story, meant that my home had been taken in the slowest, cruelest way possible. Lena did not need to file charges for me to be guilty in the eyes of the people who mattered. People will always prefer the easier dramatic truth. A man unfaithful, a wronged sister retaliating. Novels are simple, reality is messy. I found myself leaving jobs, choosing to walk away from projects because the scrutiny made me tired. The world narrowed until it consisted of a threadbare room, a kitchenette, and a handful of possessions. I rented a small place a few towns away, changed jobs, and kept my head down. Lena's victory was cultural, social, and strategic. She had taken a life and rendered it almost unrecognizable by leveraging the human appetite for moral narratives. Her success was not only in the initial affair falsehood, but in the way she sustained it, rewired people to see me as volatile, and ensured that I had no life from which to mount a credible defense. The worst part was that in trying to fight, I often proved her point. I looked desperate and erratic. The incidents she generated, the careful nudges and well-timed suggestions to others, were invisible, but the outcomes were public and painfully visible. Months later, I saw a social media post. Lena smiling in a photo with a group of women at a community fundraiser. Hair perfect, eyes bright, caption about support and recovery. The post read like a press release. Comments poured in, all earnest and kind. I clicked back to Maya's profile and found it empty. She had removed photos we had taken together. She had removed the scenes of us on a beach, the walking pictures, the glimpses of a life I had loved. Those images were gone, as if a person might be erased with a click. I tried to text Maya, but the message returned as unread. The finality of the silence was like a door swinging on its hinges in an empty house, echoing and relentless. When a man loses his name in the eyes of others, he loses a kind of citizenship. He becomes a rumor whispered into corners. I became someone whose presence in the world produced uncomfortable silence. Old friends avoided inviting me to gatherings. People I had once trusted stopped returning my messages. I realize now that Lena's weapon was more sophisticated than false intimacy. She weaponized human empathy, our stubborn willingness to believe a calm, collected narrative about victimization. In village gossip and corporate banalities, that story took root. It allowed her to walk through that world with a clean face while I was left scavenging pieces. Years passed. I rebuilt something like a life, not out of hope but out of habit. I changed jobs twice, then 3 times. I lived with the quiet company of worry. A small dog who was only mine now because Maya had taken the one we'd had together. I learned to sleep shallowly, waking at every sound. The phrase "sleep when you're dead" took on a new, bitter meaning. Sleep was no longer a refuge but a risk. I developed rituals that made the days go by edgewise. I would walk in the morning like a man measuring territory, call a friend and ask the question no one wants to ask. Did you ever believe her? And listen to the stammering answer. People rarely say what you want to hear. Most people hedge. I never saw Lena's face again in person after she disappeared, but sometimes the world reminds you of the thing that hurt you. I would spot someone with curly hair and a smile and my chest would tighten, the past rushing back like the tide. There were nights when I imagined finding her in a cafe and telling her everything I had found. Every document, every message, every cruel private joke, and watching her collapse. I dreamt about walking up to her in public and forcing her to stand under the same light that once hid her cruelty. But fantasies are cheap and hollow. The reality is that she had learned to never be where she was expected, to be everywhere and nowhere at once. She had been surgical and I was fragmented. Sometimes I replay the choices I made, the drinks I accepted, the nights I prioritized escapism over caution, the way I treated quietness at home like a precious commodity and not a signal that something was off. But in those moments of recrimination, I find no absolution. We are all half responsible for our blind spots, yes, but a predatory person looks for them the way a hunter looks for a trail. Lena had patience. She had time. She had malice combined with craft. And because society often rushes toward tidy explanations, an unfaithful husband, a wronged sister, her pattern did not require dramatic proof. It required patience and the slow drape of perception. The last thing I wish for now is revenge. Revenge is another story that promises closure that never comes. I have had enough of promises. The bitterness lingers like a taste that is not quite salt and not quite metal. Some nights I will allow myself to imagine a vindication where the world recognizes the truth, where pages of accusations are turned into apologies, where people I once loved return and Maya and I sit and make small jokes about lemons on the windowsill. But those images are fragile and false on most days. They break easily. Lena won. She dismantled my life like a clockmaker, taking the pieces and hiding them inside boxes while the world still heard the ticking. Maya went away with the conviction of someone who had been shown the worst, or at least with the conviction that leaving was necessary to survive. I am left with the cadence of a man who learned that not all wounds are visible and that some betrayals are too deliberate to be forgiven. I survive, but survival is not triumph. Survival is an endurance test of the self. Endurance is thin consolation for what was lost. And every so often, walking past a cafe where a woman smiles the way Maya used to, I feel an ache that is not a memory only but a living thing. Sharp and immediate, a constant reminder of the person I was before, a twin with a crush and a plan. Decided to make me into an exile. If anyone ever reads this and finds themselves tempted to explain away what happened to me as a simple mistake, know that there are monsters who practice. There are people who train themselves to exploit the predictable empathy of a community. There are those who will take advantage not only of a mistake but of your silence and the culture that prefers comfort over nuance. Lena did not simply hook up with me by chance. She used the chance, constructed a narrative, and then watched as people chose the easy moral verdict. I was collateral. Maya was wounded, and I mourn her absence as if she were dead. Lena moved on. She won. And I will live with the winter she made inside me for the rest of my life.